The first thing I noticed about Kerwick Hold was the smell of old blood and unwashed wolves, which was expected. The second thing I noticed was the woman in the yard. I had ridden 4 days through the Blackstone corridor of northern Drovenmore to reach this border outpost, and I had ridden with my jaw set, because the reports that preceded me had not been encouraging. A clan feud threatening to spill into the river territory. 2 packs trading wounds across the disputed flats. A Hold elder too old and too proud to send for help until the situation had curdled past easy mending. I was not in a mood for surprises. But there she was, in the middle of the Kerwick yard, kneeling in the frozen mud beside a wolf who had taken a gash along his flank badly enough that the fur around it had gone stiff with dried blood. She was cleaning the wound with a cloth and a bowl of water that steamed faintly in the cold air. The wolf, a border gray, big enough to knock a man down, lay with his head flat on the ground and his eyes half closed, completely still under her hands. That was the thing that caught me. I have been around wolves my entire life. I am the Alpha King of Drovenmore. Wolves are my blood and my office and my oldest company. And I know what a wolf looks like when it is in pain and tolerating handling it would rather not have. That wolf was not tolerating anything. It was simply still, resting. As if her hands were the most natural thing in the world to fall asleep under. I dismounted and handed my reins to the nearest man, and I watched her for another moment before the Hold's elder, Brannock, came huffing across the yard to greet me. She did not look up, not because she was rude. It was clear from the quality of her attention that she simply had not finished what she was doing, and she was not the kind of person to stop a thing half done because a king had arrived. I found that I did not mind. Brannock was a big man gone to age, with the kind of authority that had been absolute once and was now being slowly, painfully contested by his own body. He gripped my arm in greeting, which is the border Hold custom and which I respect, and he walked me through the Hold's situation with the directness that northern men use when they have been hoarding difficult news and finally have permission to put it down. The Cravenmere clan had been pushing at the river boundary for 2 seasons. Small incursions, a hunting party a league too far east, a grazing dispute settled with fists instead of the traditional arbitration. Nothing that required blood yet, but the Hold's wolves had been running patrol rotations that left them thin and worn, and 3 had come back wounded in the last month, and one of those had not come back at all. "We need your word behind us," Brannock said. "Not your sword yet, just your word." "You'll have it," I said. "Who is the woman in the yard?" He paused. It was a small pause, the kind a man makes when a question catches him in an unexamined assumption. "Merrin," he said. "She came with old Sefric's household 7 years ago when Sefric was reassigned to the Eastern Post. She stayed on." "Stayed on," I said. "In what capacity?" Another pause. "She tends the wolves," he said finally, "among other things." "What other things?" He looked slightly uncomfortable in the way of a man who has never had to articulate something he has simply taken for granted. "She keeps the stores, manages the winter ration count, tends to the elder women of the Hold when they're ill. She knows the border herbs." He stopped. "She doesn't have a formal rank," he added, as though this explained something that needed explaining. "She isn't of a pack family exactly. Sefric's late wife was her mother's cousin, I believe." "Where does she sleep?" He told me. The storeroom off the East Passage, which had a small hearth and a decent south-facing window, which was better than nothing but not what you would call comfortable. She had been offered nothing better. He did not say this with any particular guilt. It had simply never presented itself to him as a problem. I nodded and said nothing more about it, and we went inside to discuss the Cravenmere situation. That first evening I walked the Hold's perimeter at dusk, which is my habit in any new territory. You learn more from a slow walk at last light than from a dozen formal briefings. The Hold sat on a bluff above the North Fork of the Care River, black stone walls, iron gate arch, and the old pack seal above the arch that every Drovenmore Hold carries. A circular disc of smelted iron, worked with the old symbols, that was set in place when the Hold was founded and was meant, according to the oldest customs, to recognize the true bloodline of the territory's Luna. Most of them had gone dark centuries ago. The custom was more ceremony than function now. We lit them at festivals with torchlight and told the old stories and moved on with our lives. Kerwick's seal was dark as the rest. I looked at it for a moment and then kept walking. I found her at the edge of the Hold's wolf yard, where the working wolves were kenneled between patrols. She was sitting on the fence rail, just sitting in the evening cold, while 3 of the patrol wolves stood below her with their heads resting against the rail near her hands. Not demanding anything, not performing, just close to her. I stopped a respectful distance away. "They trust you," I said. She looked over. She had a calm face, not plain, not striking, just honest in its lines, the kind of face that does not rearrange itself for company. "They know me," she said. "That's different from trust, I think. Trust is a thing you earn each time. Knowing is just accumulated time." I thought about that. "The gray in the yard," I said. "He took a bad gash." 3 weeks ago," she said. "He'll carry the scar, but he'll patrol again come spring." "What did you use?" She told me the border mosses, a particular bark, a clay poultice she'd learned from one of the elder women who had died 2 winters back. She spoke about it the way people speak about things they know very well and do not think of as impressive. Clean, specific, no flourish. The wolves did not move while she talked. They stood there with their great heads against the rail and their breath making slow clouds in the cold, and they were as settled as anything I had seen all day in this unsettled place. I said good night and walked back to the hold. My wolf, the instinct that lives in a man's chest the way a second heartbeat lives in his chest, had gone very quiet, not the quiet of something switched off, the quiet of something paying close attention. I had intended to stay 2 days, settle the Cravenmere situation by written arbitration and the weight of my seal, and ride back south. I stayed 5. I told myself it was the complexity of the border matter, which was partly true. Cravenmere's clan elder was a man who needed to be talked at length before he would accept any settlement that felt like yielding, and talking a proud man to yes takes time. But I am an honest enough person to admit, at least to myself, that there were other reasons I did not hurry. The second morning I came into the main hall early and found the fire already built and a pot of broth already on, and Marin at the far end of the table, doing something with a length of cloth and a needle that turned out, on closer inspection, to be the repair of a wolf harness. Not her job. Not anyone's assigned job. She had noticed it needed doing, so she was doing it. She looked up when I came in. "There's broth," she said. "The kitchen won't be warm for another hour." I sat down and had the broth. She went back to the harness. We did not speak for a while, and it was one of the more comfortable silences I have sat in for some time. I spend a great deal of my life in the company of people who feel they must fill the air around the Alpha King with words, and I have grown very tired of it. She did not feel that compulsion at all. "How long have you been the one who gets up first?" I asked. She looked up again, a slight consideration behind her eyes as though the question was interesting. "I'm not sure I think of it that way," she said. "I wake up early. Things want doing in the early hours, so I do them." "Does anyone ask you to?" "No," she said, and then, because she was apparently a person who believed in completeness, "No one asks me to do most of what I do here." "And you do it anyway." "Things need doing," she said simply, and went back to the harness. I drank my broth and looked at the fire and thought about what Brannock had said. She doesn't have a formal rank, as if rank were the thing that made work matter. The third day I saw her with the children. Kerwick had a small cluster of pack families in residence, the permanent hold staff and their households, and among them were a number of small children, as there always are in any place where people live closely together. The hold did not have a school exactly. Education was patchy, northern, practical. But I turned a corner in the late afternoon and found Marin seated on a low stool in the corridor near the storeroom, with 4 children arranged on the floor around her, and she was teaching them letters. Not formally. She had drawn shapes in the dust of the stone floor with a stick, and the children were copying them with their fingers, and she was saying the sounds each shape made in a voice that was low and unhurried, as though this were the most natural thing in an afternoon. One of the children was Davin, the 6-year-old son of Brannock's second-in-command. He had been born without full movement in his left hand, and the other children, with the casual, unthinking cruelty of children, had decided this was a reason to exclude him from everything that required 2 full hands. Marin had placed him on her right side so that his working hand was near the pattern she was drawing. She had done it without comment, without making it a thing. She had simply arranged the afternoon so that Davin could do what the others were doing. He was grinning at his own letters in the dust, absorbed and proud, and no one was looking at his hand. I stood in the corridor and watched for long enough that my wolf went absolutely, completely, wordlessly still in my chest. That deep stillness that I had felt for only 3 days now, always in some relation to her, always the same quality. The stillness of something that has been moving for a very long time and has, for the first time, considered stopping. I went on before any of the children saw me and made her into a performance. That evening I spoke privately to Brannock. "The woman Marin," I said. "What is her situation here exactly?" He gave me the careful look of a man who understands that a question from the Alpha King is rarely as simple as it sounds. "She has her room," he said. "Her keep. She's useful to us." "Useful," I said. "She tends your wounded wolves and sets your roster and keeps your winter stores and teaches the children letters and gets up before anyone else to build the fire. She has done this for 7 years with no formal rank, no household name behind her, and a storeroom for a bedroom." Brannock was quiet for a moment. "When you put it that way." "I'm not putting it any way," I said. "I'm asking you to look at it directly. Has anyone ever offered her more?" He had the grace to look briefly ashamed. "She's never asked." "People who spend their lives giving," I said, "often don't." He nodded slowly. "There was some talk a few years back of finding her a match, a man with a northern holding decent enough. She thanked the council and declined." "Why?" "She didn't say, we didn't press." He paused. "She seemed content, I suppose. She seemed like she'd decided something." I nodded and let it go. But I thought about it that night, lying in the hold's best guest room, which was, I had to note, considerably warmer and better furnished than a storeroom with a south window. And I thought about the shape of a life that was built entirely out of giving and had somehow never asked itself what it might receive. My wolf was not still that night. It paced slow and thoughtful, the way it does when it knows something that I am not yet ready to know. The 4th day, the crisis arrived. A Cravenmere patrol, 3 men and their wolves, crossed the river boundary at the ford 2 leagues north of the hold. They were not armed for combat, which was something. But they were clearly testing, riding slow and deliberate in territory that was not theirs, waiting to see what response would come. I went out myself with 4 of Kerwick's patrol wolves and 2 of my own riders, and we met them at the ford, and I made the Drovenmore position on the boundary clear in the language that northern men understand. Simple, flat, unapologetic. I was not looking for a fight. I was stating a fact. The Cravenmere men looked at the Alpha King's seal on my chest and made the calculation that most men make in that situation, and they turned their horses around and went back across the ford. Good, clean done. But one of Kerwick's patrol wolves had taken a stone from the riverbed wrong in the retreat and was limping badly by the time we rode back in through the gate. I brought it to the wolf yard myself, because a lame wolf on patrol rotation is a problem that wants immediate attention. Marin was already there before I'd finished dismounting. She came out of the hold's side door at a near run, not a panic, just a person who moves fast when something needs moving fast, and she was kneeling beside the wolf in the yard and running her hands along the leg before I had handed off my horse. "Stone bruise," she said after a moment. "Nothing fractured." She looked up. "He'll want cold water and rest. Can you spare him for 4 days?" "Yes," I said. She nodded and got to work, and I stayed longer than I needed to, watching her hands on the wolf's leg, careful, specific, knowing. The wolf, who had been unhappy and resistant for the entire ride back, settled within 30 seconds of her touching him. "You have a gift," I said. She didn't look up. "I have experience. I've had 7 years to learn this particular animal's particular complaints. He doesn't like his off foreleg touched below the knee. Someone hurt him there before he came to Kerwick. He needs you to approach his right side first, or he'll snap. He likes the smell of the river moss better than the bark poultice, so I use the moss when I can." She sat back on her heels. "That's not a gift, that's just paying attention." I thought of something my mother had once said to me, when I was young and impatient with the tedium of close observation. "Aldrich, any fool can ride into a room. A king learns to notice what's already there." She had been trying to teach me patience, and I had learned patience eventually, but I think she had been trying to teach me something else as well, something I was only now beginning to understand. "You see things," I said. "You see the wolf that was hurt before, the child who needs his strong hand placed nearest the letters, the harness that needs mending before someone's patrol fails because of a weak strap." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, without any self-consciousness at all, If you don't look, things fall apart, and then people get hurt, so you look. She said it as though it were the simplest equation in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe I had spent my entire life surrounded by people who had convinced themselves it was complicated. That night I arranged for the storeroom to be cleared and reassigned for supply use, and I had Brannick offer Marin the hold's eastern guest room, a proper room, with a proper bed and a fireplace that drew well and a view of the river. Brannick reported back that she had thanked him very politely, looked at the room for a long moment in silence, and then said she would move her things in the morning. He also reported I could tell he was uncertain whether to include this, that when he'd turned to go, she'd said quietly, "Tell the Alpha King thank you," and then, "Though I imagine he knows what he's doing without being thanked for it." I laughed at that, alone in my borrowed room, in a way I had not laughed at anything in some time. A clean, surprised laugh. She was exactly right. I had arranged the room because it was right. Because it was a small repair in a long list of things at this hold that had been allowed to drift from what they should have been. But she had looked straight through the gesture to the reasoning behind it, the way she looked straight through everything to the thing underneath, and she had named it without ego or sentiment, with just that same clean accuracy she brought to a wolf's lame leg or a child's writing lesson. I lay awake for a long time. My wolf was not pacing now. My wolf was sitting, still and alert the way it sits when it is watching something it intends to keep watching. The 5th day. I had finished my business at Kerwick. The Cravenmere situation was formally settled by written arbitration, sealed with my mark and witnessed by both elders. The patrol rotation had been restructured so the hold's wolves were less worn. I had spoken to Brannick at length about what I expected in terms of monthly reports and the hold's conduct going forward, and he had listened with the focused attention of a man who understood that he had been given a second chance at something. I should have been saddling my horse by mid-morning. Instead, I found myself, just before mid-morning, standing in the eastern passage outside the door of the room that had been Marin's one night, and was already, somehow, organized and settled in a way that suggested she would make any space she inhabited into something functional and calm within hours of entering it. I knocked. She said come in, and I came in, and she was at the window, the river view, the gray Drovenmore sky, the far line of heather flat that ran to the northern horizon. She turned when I entered, and something in her face shifted almost imperceptibly. Not surprise. She had perhaps been expecting this conversation or something like it. People who pay close attention often see things coming. "I'm leaving today," I said. "I know," she said. I wanted to say I stopped. This was not a thing I was practiced at, I realized, saying the thing directly without ceremony or official framing. The Alpha King speaks in decrees and rulings and formal assessments. What I wanted to say was none of those things. I tried again. "You have been doing in this hold for 7 years the work that keeps a place alive, not the work anyone gave you, not the work anyone asked you to document. The invisible work, the fire at dawn, the wolf's leg, the child's letters, the harness that would have failed at the worst moment." I paused. "I want you to know that I have seen it." She was quiet. She was, I noticed, very careful not to look away from me, which told me the words had landed somewhere that mattered, because her composure was real, but it was not infinite, and she was working to hold it steadily. "Thank you," she said, and then, "It needed doing." "Yes," I said, "but not everyone does the things that need doing. Many people walk past them. You have walked toward them every day for 7 years in a place that gave you a storeroom for a bed and a borrowed name for a household and nothing by way of recognition. And I stopped again. I think that deserves to be said aloud, by someone with the authority to say it. Something moved in her face. Not tears, she was not, I thought, a person who cried easily or publicly. Just a small loosening somewhere around her eyes of something she had been holding carefully in place for a long time. "All right," she said quietly, "I'll accept that." I nodded. I should have gone then. I had said what I came to say. Instead, I said, "I'll come back." She looked at me directly, to check on the boundary situation. "Yes," I said, "among other reasons." She considered this. Something passed through her expression that I could not entirely read, a thought, a weighing of something, and then she said, "The hold could use a proper arbitration charter drawn up for the next border dispute. Before the next one starts, rather than during." "I'll bring one," I said. "Good," she said. "Then there will be a reason for both of us." I left after that. I rode south with my 2 riders, and the Drovenmore heather stretched gray and wide in every direction, and my wolf was not pacing and was not watching and was not restless. My wolf was simply present, in the way of something that has decided where it is going and does not feel the need to hurry, but does not feel any doubt either. I was already planning when I would ride back. 18 days later, I rode back. I had the arbitration charter. I also had a warrant of formal appointment, the Alpha King's seal, which I had never given to anyone in an unofficial capacity before naming Meryn of Caerwick as caretaker of the Hold's wolves and households, with the standing and the keep that position deserved. It was not strictly a traditional office. I had created it because it was the right description of work already being done, and because a title and a wage were the smallest acknowledgement I could make of 7 years' unclaimed labor. I had also spent 18 days thinking about my wolf, about the stillness, about the quality of attention that came over me in her presence, not distraction, not infatuation, but something quieter and more fundamental, the feeling of a compass finding north. I am a man who has run a kingdom for 15 years. I know the difference between a thing that pulls at you and a thing that simply holds. She held. She had held from the moment I saw her kneeling in the mud with her hands on a wolf's wound. I did not intend to say any of this on arrival. I intended to deliver the charter, deliver the appointment warrant, conduct the follow-up on the boundary situation, and give her time. She was not a woman who would be rushed toward anything. She was a woman who moved when the moment was right, and I had enough sense to understand that I was not yet fully the right moment. But I had come back, and I had brought what I promised, and that was a start. The Hold came into view at late afternoon, the Blackstone Gate, the Iron Arch, the old seal dark above the passage. I came through the gate with my 2 riders, and Brannock came out to meet me, and I asked for Meryn. "She's at the eastern boundary near the ford," he said. "There was a report of a wolf tangled in a Cravenmere fence line. They sent word, surprisingly enough, and she went out with one of the patrol men." I turned my horse and rode out. I found her at the ford. The Cravenmere fence line was a stretch of old wooden staking and rope that marked the far side of the river, and the wolf, a young border male, barely 2 seasons old, had gotten his back leg wrapped twice around the bottom rope in a panic, and had then fallen trying to free himself, and was now on his side in the shallows, exhausted and twisted and frightened out of all proportion to the actual danger, because that is what panic does. The Cravenmere man who had sent the report was standing on the far bank looking helpless. Caerwick's patrol man was on this side looking similarly uncertain, because when a wolf is down and panicking in cold water, the odds of getting bitten are high regardless of your intentions. Meryn was in the shallows with the wolf. She had waded into the knee. Her boots were soaked. She was bent over the wolf, not grabbing, not restraining, just crouching beside him in the cold water with one hand resting on his neck and her face close to his face, and she was talking to him in a voice too low to hear from the bank. Just talking, slowly, without stopping. The wolf was still thrashing when I arrived. By the time I had dismounted and reached the bank, perhaps 2 minutes, it had stopped. Its sides were heaving, but it was still. Its great wet head lay in the shallows, and her hand was on its neck, and it was looking at her. Then she worked. Slow, methodical, 1 loop at a time, she freed the rope from his leg, checking before each move, resetting when he tensed, waiting when he needed her to wait. The Cravenmere man had forded over by then and was on his knees in the water helping at her direction, and the rope came free in segments, and eventually the wolf stood, shaky and soaked, and shook himself enormously, and walked 3 unsteady steps onto the bank and lay down. Meryn waded out of the shallows. Her hem was wet to the thigh. She checked the wolf's leg in the quick, competent way she did everything, pronounced it uninjured, told the Cravenmere man to give the animal 2 days of rest and warm food, and turned around to find me standing at the bank. She looked at me for a moment. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," I said. "Yes," she said. "You did." She was wet and cold, and there was river mud on her skirt, and her hair had come mostly loose. And she looked at me with exactly the same clear, unperformed directness she had brought to every exchange we had ever had. And something in my chest that had been tightening for 18 days pulled very tight indeed, and then released. And my wolf, which had been still for 18 days, patient and deliberate, made a sound in me that was not quite sound, more like the feeling of a held breath finally let go. I did not say any of it. I handed her my riding cloak because she was shivering, and she looked at it for a moment and then put it on, without ceremony, which was exactly right. We rode back to the hold. That evening was the longest I had spent at Kerwick. I gave Brannock the arbitration charter and walked him through it while Marin sat at the far end of the table and listened without commenting, except once, when Brannock asked about the provision for river boundary disputes, and she said quietly, "The ford at Two Herons needs its own clause. Cravenmere has a seasonal fishing claim there that predates the current boundary lines. If you don't account for it, you'll have a new dispute before the year is out." And she was right, and we added the clause. Afterward, when Brannock had gone to have the document copied and the hold had settled into its evening routines, I sat across from her at the table, and I gave her the appointment warrant. She read it carefully, all the way through, not a skim, an actual reading. Then she set it down and looked at me. "You didn't have to create an office to pay me fairly," she said. "No," I said, "but the office is the right description of what you do, and Drovenmore should have an accurate record of the work that holds its border territory together." She was quiet for a moment. "Caretaker of the hold's wolves and households," she said. "That's what I've been." "Yes. For 7 years." "Yes." "Without anyone noticing." "Some people noticed," I said. "They simply never had the authority to make it official." She looked at me. Something in her expression was very still. Not the stillness of someone closing a door, but the stillness of someone standing in a doorway, deciding whether to walk through. "Why now?" she said. I could have given her the official answer. The arbitration visit, the systematic review of hold conditions, the correction of long-standing administrative oversights. All of it true. "Because I didn't want to leave this time," I said, "without making certain that you knew your worth had been seen. Not just by me, on record, in Drovenmore's record." The stillness in her face deepened. "And when you ride south again," she said. "I'll come back," I said, "more often than before." "For the border situation," she said. The slight, careful curve at the corner of her mouth that I had noticed once before, the shape of something thought but not quite said. "For the border situation," I said, "and for the arbitration reviews, and to see how the Grey Wolf's flank is healing, and to see how Davin's letters are coming along." I stopped. "And for you," I said, "if you'll allow it." She was quiet for a long time. "I am not," she started, stopped, tried again. "I am not a woman who needs rescuing, Aldrich." "I know that," I said. "I'm not here to rescue you. I couldn't if I tried. You've been rescuing this hold for 7 years without help." That caught her. A flash of something behind her eyes, surprise, and something warmer. "I would like to come back," I said simply. "To see you, to talk with you, to sit in the same room with someone who builds the fire before anyone asks and mends the harness before it fails and sets the child's strong hand nearest the work. I have been the Alpha King for 15 years, and I have never once, in 15 years, sat at a table with someone who simply said the true thing without deciding first whether it was what I wanted to hear." I paused. "I'd like more of that." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You'd better be prepared for it then. I find politeness harder than honesty." "So do I said. "We'll be difficult company for each other," she said. "Probably," I said. "All right," she said, and the corner of her mouth curved, and this time it completed itself, and it was the best thing I had seen in a very long time. I rode south 4 days later, and I came back 3 weeks after that, and then again 6 weeks after that, and each time the drive south was shorter in feeling, and the drive north was something I looked forward to in a way I had not looked forward to very much in some time. The boundary held. The Cravenmere situation stayed settled, better than settled, in fact, because the Two Herons clause gave the rival clan a legitimate grievance mechanism, and people who have a legitimate mechanism use it instead of their fists. The patrol wolves healed and returned to rotation. The Grey Wolf's flank scarred over cleanly, exactly as she had said it would. Davin's letters were coming along very well. She and I talked, on every visit, for longer than I could account for in any formal record. About the hold, about the border clans, about the old histories of the North, which she knew better than I did because she had read the hold's archive from one end to the other in 7 years of early mornings. About small things, the way the river changed color at first frost, the particular smell of the heather when it rained, the personality of each wolf in the yard, which she knew the way a person knows a large and complicated family. I told her things about the kingdom that I had not said aloud to anyone else. Not state matters, those were not mine to share without cause, but the texture of the work. The weight of decisions that were always, on some level, decisions about people's lives. The loneliness that was built into the office, and that I had grown so accustomed to that I had stopped noticing it until it was, very suddenly, lifting. She listened the way she did everything, completely, without performing the listening. And when she said something back to me, it was always the true thing, without regard for whether the true thing was comfortable. She was never unkind, but she was unfailingly honest, which is rarer than kindness and, in the long run, more valuable. The evening of my 5th return visit, late in the winter season, I arrived at Caerwick in a hard snow. The kind of flat, driven snow that turns the northern moors into a single gray-white expanse and makes the black stone walls of the hold look like something from the oldest stories. My 2 riders were half frozen, and my horse was unhappy, and I was colder than I would admit, and the light through the hold's windows looked like the warmest thing in the world. I came through the gate, and I heard the pack seal activate. I want to be precise about this. I heard it before I saw it, because the sound a dormant iron seal makes when it wakes is not a sound you mistake for anything else. It is a low, resonant tone, somewhere between a bell and a resonance inside stone, and it comes from the seal itself before the light follows. And when I looked up, the Caerwick seal was blazing gold in the snow and dark. Alive, lit from within, the old symbols running with warm light, for the first time, as far as I could learn, in over 2 centuries. My wolf was not still. My wolf was already down. I don't mean that symbolically. The instinct, the deep wolf nature of an alpha king, which is real and physical and not a metaphor, dropped in my chest the way a man drops to his knees when something enormous happens, and I felt it before I understood it, and then I understood it completely. I turned. She was standing in the entry to the hold's side passage, which was where she usually appeared when I arrived, not rushing out to greet me, not standing on ceremony, just there, present the way she was always present. She was looking up at the seal with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not recognition, not as though she had expected this. Astonishment. And then, after a breath, something deeper and quieter settling in behind the astonishment. She lowered her eyes to me. I was on one knee in the snow. I did not decide to kneel. It was not a diplomatic act or a formal gesture or a performance. It was the most honest response I had to what was happening, and honesty was something she had taught me by example, and I had been paying attention. My wolf was kneeling with me, in every real sense. Around us, at the gate, in the yard, in the kennels, the wolves were going down. One by one, and then all at once, the way a hall goes quiet, the patrol wolves and the working wolves and the 2 who had come north with me from my own guard. All of them down, all of them with their heads toward her. In the gateway behind me I heard Brannock, and I heard 2 of the hold's elder men, and I heard the held breath of the patrol guard who had been changing shift when this happened. And I knew they were seeing what they were seeing, which was the pack seal of Caerwick hold lit for the first time in 2 centuries, and the alpha king of Drovenmore on his knee in the snow, and every wolf on the property bowing to a woman in a plain wool dress who was standing very still in the doorway and trying, with the particular careful composure that was entirely her own, to take in what was happening. I want to tell you what I said, but the truth is that what I said was simple, because I had stopped being a man who hides behind ceremony some weeks before this night, and had started being a man who said the thing directly in her company, and the habit had taken. Marin, I said there in the snow, the seal knows what I have known for some time now. If you are willing, I would have you as Luna of Drovenmore. She was quiet. The snow came down around us. The seal burned gold. The wolves did not move. That's a considerable offer, she said finally, from a man who once came to a border hold to conduct an arbitration review. It is, I agreed. I am aware that the arbitration review was not the point. No, she said, it wasn't a pause, though the 2 herons clause was genuinely necessary. It was, I said, that part was legitimate. She looked at me. She looked at the seal. She looked at the wolves, all of them still, all of them patient, all of them waiting in the snow with the particular quality of waiting that means the answer is not in doubt, only the words. All right, she said, yes. She said it the way she said most things, without performance, without excess, simply and completely. I stood, I crossed to her, there in the entry of a cold northern hold on a snowy evening, and I took her hand in mine, her cold hand, which had tended wolves and built fires and mended harnesses and written children's letters in the dust. And I held it, and the seal above the arch burned on. Brannock behind me let out a breath that was almost laughter. The elder men of the hold made the old formal bow, the one from the oldest ceremonies, which I had seen in my life exactly 3 times before, and it was the right bow for this moment. Maren looked at them, at Brannock, at the 2 elders who had given her a storeroom for 7 years and were now bowing with the sincerity of men who understood, clearly and at last, what they had failed to see. She did not make anything of it. She simply received it with the same quiet completeness she brought to everything. Then she looked at me, and her expression was the one I had come to know, direct, honest, unglamoured, and underneath those things something warm and steady that she did not perform or announce. That was simply always there when she looked at me, and that I intended to spend a very long time looking back at. We rode south to Aldenmore, the capital hold, in the first week of spring. I will not make a ceremony of what is already ceremonial. The formal naming was done in the great hall at Aldenmore, which holds 600 wolves and their riders when full, and was full that day, and Maren stood at the center of it in a dress that was, characteristically, well-made and sensible rather than ornate, and received the title with the same composure she had received everything. Several members of the Capital Council, men who had never heard of Caerwick Hold, and would not have been able to place it on a map, found, afterward, that the new Lunar of Drovenmore knew a great deal about border law and Paxil history and the seasonal grazing disputes of the northern territories, and that she had opinions about all of it that were specific and defensible, and that she was not inclined to soften those opinions for the sake of a comfortable meeting. I found this extremely satisfying. She found the capital's kitchens immediately, on the first day, and by the 3rd day had identified 3 inefficiencies in the winter store's rotation that the hold manager had not noticed in 5 years. She did not make a point of it. She simply told the hold manager who fixed them. She also found the capital's wolf yards and spent the first morning in them, and by afternoon had names for all 17 working wolves, and by the 2nd day 2 of them were following her across the courtyard like dogs following a familiar. The children of the capital hold, there are always children, in any place where people live, found her within a week. I'm not sure I can adequately describe what it was to watch Maren in a place that finally had the size to accommodate what she was. At Caerwick, she had been doing the work of a hold with more capacity than anyone had recognized. At Aldenmore, the work expanded to meet her, and she met it without any particular display of effort, simply with the same steady attention she had always given to whatever was in front of her. She was still up before anyone else each morning. I started getting up earlier. She noticed. She said nothing about it for a week. Then one morning she simply set a 2nd cup beside the pot without comment, and we sat across from each other in the early quiet of the great hall before the fires were fully built and the morning staff had arrived, and neither of us said anything for a while, and it was the most comfortable silence I had inhabited since the fence rail at Caerwick in the evening cold. "You know," she said finally, "you don't have to be up at this hour. You're the Alpha King." "I know," I said. "I find I prefer it." She considered that. To sleeping. To being in the same room with someone who gets up early and doesn't explain themselves about it. The corner of her mouth curved. "I do not explain myself," she agreed. "No," I said. "You don't. I've been trying to do less of it myself. You've set a very demanding standard." She looked at me with the directness that I would never stop finding the most clarifying thing I knew. "You're doing well," she said, "for someone who spent 15 years in an office that required him to explain his every move." 14 years, I said. The 15th I've been trying to learn from a better example. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am not a better example. I'm a person who pays attention and dislikes wasted effort." "I know," I said. "That's what I mean." She looked at me. The warmth that she did not perform or announce was there, steady and clear in the early light. "Well," she said, "then we'll manage." We did.